talk for this season is Fellini, Contini, and Franklin, the midlife crisis of an artist. And I'm so proud of you that read that in the letter and came anyway. Because let's face it, is there anything that could possibly be worse than showing up and listening to someone complain about their midlife crisis? I promise there will be no complaining on this trip. So the reason that we're going to talk about midlife crisis is because in June, just as I had finished directing the last 5 years as part of our summer season, I sat down the day after we opened, and I sat down with the script for 9 and realized, okay, it's time. You got 2.5 months, time to get to work on this show. And I sat down and I read it, and I got about 20 pages in, and I threw it across the room and thought, oh, great. You've really got yourself into it this time, Frank, because you have nothing to connect with this show. It is really machismo, quite a bit of misogyny in the show. What are you going to do with this show? And I put it aside and pretended like it wasn't happening and went on vacation, as you do. And so I went on a vacation across the country, as I do every couple of years, to visit our former students and to see how they're doing. It's a good opportunity for me to see how their education is turning into a career, and to ask them up front, honestly, what did we not give you? And I was in New York City visiting with a whole crew of students, several of which who still couldn't be there. I went to Seattle, Washington, and visited Jeff Orton, who is a director there in Seattle. And I also went to Denver, Colorado, where I met with particularly Thomas Yeager and Remy Velez of 7 in Colorado. That's their film company. And they had, this is us having a celebratory drink after they have just finished and turned in their project for the 48-hour film project. You don't know the 48-hour film project? It's an international competition. People around the world, same weekend, all show up at one place and they pull out a genre. It could be superhero, it could be rom-com, it could be a comedy, it could be a dark comedy, and they pull out and what the genre is, and they have 48 hours to write the script, cast the show, build the sets, do the costumes, produce the script, produce the film, and put it with a score. And they had just finished, their team of about 15 had just finished this beautiful film that we'll actually be sharing on our Facebook page and our website here in the next week or so. So this is a great thing, right? I've had this wonderful vacation where I'm being reminded that what I'm doing is working and it's good. And there's any of you in here who are teachers, you realize that that's also kind of hard on you as you're reaching middle age, because you realize that all these people who used to be little are now fully fledged adults. And there's nothing that makes you quite feel so old as that. So I dealt with it as so many men do. And I met someone. This is Lola, my lovely little convertible. She was waiting for me when I got home, and we are very happy together. And I thought you would like to know that I'm enjoying my midlife crisis immensely. My vacation. Yes, doing well. So I came home, and immediately Lola and I drove to Denver, and when I got back, I said, okay, you've got 3 weeks, you've got to decide what's going on with this script. So I picked the script up again, started going through it, and I read through it in about 50 minutes. And I sat down and I went, oh, I get it. It's about an artist going through a midlife crisis. Perfect! I know exactly what I'm going to do with this show. So, I'm going to give you a little background on the history of 9 and how we got to tonight's performance along the way. The filmmaker Federico Fellini, one of the greatest filmmakers of all time, is the subject matter of tonight's show. And most specifically, one of his films, 8 1/2, and I'll talk about that in just a few moments. We look at Fellini as a filmmaker, an Italian filmmaker who was very well known for blending Baroque imagery and modern storyline. He loved to delve into the subject of how modernization was affecting our relationships, and he felt that taking modern stories and putting them in ancient locations, or ancient stories and putting them in modern locations, helped us to be able to delve into what was going on in our current society. He said, the public has lost the habit of moviegoing because the cinema no longer possesses the charm, the hypnotic charisma, the authority it once commanded. The image it once held up for us all, that of a dream we dreamt with our eyes open, has disappeared. Is it still possible that 1,000 people might group together in the dark and experience the dream that a single individual has directed? That's a question we ask ourselves frequently in our line of work right now. The question ultimately comes down to always, with Hulu and Netflix at the ready, what is the reason why people still gather in a dark theater to watch one piece of art? Some of his most famous works, before we get to 8½, are La Strada, which translates as The Road, starring Anthony Quinn. That was in 1954. Nights of Cabiria, or Le Notte di Cabiria, written in 1957. And La Dolce Vita, probably the most well-known of Fellini's films, which of course translates as The Sweet Life, was written in 1960. There's a couple things to know about Fellini. I mentioned already that his work is highly autobiographical, even though it's well veiled as being about him. A couple quotes about this. He says, all art is autobiographical. The pearl is the oyster's autobiography. That's a great quote, right? Also, he said, even if I set out to make a film about a fillet of sole, it would be about me. When asked if the stories that were being told were really about his life, he responded, it is not memory that dominates my films. To say that my films are autobiographical is an overly facile liquidation, a hasty classification. I love this part. It seems to me that I have invented almost everything. Childhood, character, nostalgias, dreams, memories, for the pleasure of being able to recount them. And as a Southerner who loves telling stories about my life, and as I told someone recently, I said I've told the stories about my life like a Southerner for so long that I'm not really sure what's fact and what really happened, or what's just really great storytelling. And that's the way I translate that. The other element of Fellini is how he deals with realism. He likes to mix the ideas of realism and surrealism together and have them weave intertwining throughout the show. A couple comments. He says, realism is a bad word. In a sense, everything is realistic. I see no line between the imaginary and the real. The artist is the medium between his fantasies and the rest of the world. Amen. What is an artist? A provincial who finds himself somewhere between a physical reality and a metaphysical one. It's this in-between that I'm calling a province, this frontier country between the tangible world and the intangible one, which is really the realm of the artist. And it is only when I'm doing my work that I feel truly alive. At the age of 43, he wrote the film 8½. 8½ tells the story of a director, film director, who has just turned 40, and he has 4 days before he is supposed to start shooting a new film, which he has not written the script for because he doesn't know what it's going to be about. He has made the majority of his biggest hits when he was younger, and as he turns 40, he's beginning to ask that question of himself, which I'm so familiar with, is all my great work behind me in this field for the young? There's a quote from the film. The character of Guido in the film is played by the wonderful Marcello Mastroianni, and he says, a crisis of inspiration? What if it's not just temporary, my dear friend? What if it's the final downfall of a big, fat, no-talent imposter? So, it's this film about a fractured life, about this very element that previous quote by Fellini said, this idea that the artist exists in a very real world dealing with very real relationships, while on the other side is still dealing with this creative world, this place where things can magically happen, things can evolve out of reality and turn into a fantasy, and the way that those two worlds mesh together. There was a critic who wrote about the character Guido. I want to read what he wrote. He said, he is obsessed by eroticism, a sadist, a masochist, a self-mythologizer, an adulterer, a clown, a liar, and a cheat. He's afraid of life and wants to return to his mother's womb. The film is introverted, a sort of private monologue interspersed with glimpses of reality. Fellini's dreams are always surprising and, in a figurative sense, original. but his memories are pervaded by a deeper, more delicate sentiment. This is why the 2 episodes concerning the hero's childhood and his meeting with the woman on the beach in Rimini are the best of the film and among the best of all Fellini's works to date. So in 1973, a young composer named Mar Yestin, he was teaching at Yale at the time, but he was at the same time traveling back into Manhattan to be a part of Lehman Engel's BMI Music Theater Workshop. He said, I looked at the screen and said, that's me. I still believe in all the dreams and ideals of what it was to be an artist, and here was a movie about an artist in trouble. It became an obsession. 9 was the thing I really desperately wanted to write, never thinking for a minute that would ever be produced. As I grew, I began to realize that there was room to explore the reactions of the inner workings of the women in Guido's wake. The great secret of 9 is that it took 8 and a half and became an essay on the power of women by answering the question, what are women to men? And 9 tells you they are our mothers, our sisters, our teachers, our temptresses, our judges, our nurses, our wives, our mistresses, our muses. That was Mar Yestin. Now, as wonderfully poetic as that is, this is a Fellini quote. It is easier to be faithful to a restaurant than it is to a woman. So it's certainly a departure from Fellini to change 9 into, or 8.5 into 9 under those auspices. Consequently, the title of 9 is an interesting story. Fellini primarily gave his films autobiographical titles, and frequently the titles were more about him than they were about the film. And the film 8.5 is a perfect example of that. There is nothing in the film that would make you think the title should be called 8.5. Nothing. 8.5 reflects back on the number of films he had made by the time he did 8.5. He had made 6 feature-length films, 2 short films, and he had co-directed a film, henceforth half of one, so 8.5. When they decided to take 8.5 and put music with it, Mar Yestin said, if you add music to 8.5, it's like half a number more. And that's where the title 9 first came about. 9 also refers to the age that Guido is during his first hallucination in the film, in the show. The first time that you see him truly hallucinate, he sees his 9-year-old self. And that is a recurring element, and you find out at the end of the first act that there's a major point in his life at that age of 9 that is really a part of his relationship with all of the women in his life. And so I'll point you in that direction there. The other side of 9 is referring to the 9 lead women in the show. There are 9 women and a chorus of women as well. Those 9 all represent different parts of that list that Yestin just gave us. The temptress, the wife, the teacher, the mother, and such and so forth, the sister. And so you're going to meet all of those individually through the show. 9 went on to win 5 Tony Awards in 1982. It won for Best Musical, Best Original Score, which went to Mar Yestin, who wrote both the score and the lyrics. Best Performance and in a featured role as an actress went to Liliane Montevecchi, who I'll talk about in a few minutes. Best Direction of a Musical went to Tommy Tune, and Best Costume Design went to William Ivey Long. And I would just like to point out that working with William Ivey Long was Mark Matthews and Bruce Catt, who lived with us here in Grand Junction. Mark was a part of the original team from 1981 to 1984, working on the original production. And we probably won't have time after, we're so glad Mark's here with us, we probably won't have time right after the reception, but when you come out for intermission, just on the other side of this brick wall, across from the box office, are 2 gifts that Mark and Bruce have given to us from the original production of 9. So please be sure to check those out. So we did all of this research on Fellini, on 8.5, and it didn't really change the way we felt about the script, but it certainly informed the way that we dealt with the play. So we started, I started by working with Jill. And Jill and I, we're very similar. We love just sitting there and gabbing about what is going on in a character's life and what is going on at the center of the script. And we're very similar in our research attempts. We work very much visually, and so the next couple slides are visuals that are from Jill's research. We started looking for the look that would specifically describe each character. But one thing we were very certain of was that we were going to stick to the time period. We would be in 1960s Italy, which, as Jill has said on numerous occasions, is a wonderful time period to have to design for, because it's such beautiful fashion. And if we think about American fashion that tied in across from that, we would think of Jackie O, right? A very clean line, elegant look, simplicity, and so it became immediately a lot of fun. We started working through the cast list, and just to tie you in with the relationships that you're about to see on the stage, Luisa is his wife, controlled, sophisticated, put together, clean. Carla is his mistress, flashy, trashy, emotive, seductive, playful, bored. Claudia is his muse, an actress that he worked with when he was younger that he has stuck in time. So much so that she spends the majority of the second act trying to get him to see her for who she really is now that they've gotten older. Sergina, a character from his childhood who you meet at the end of the second act, who had a major effect on his life. She's a prostitute. So we looked at her as earthy, confident, grounded in the body. And then, of course, we had to look at the more fantastic moments that take place within the show. There are two that I specifically will speak of. One is the first act, one is the second. The first is the Folie Bergère number, which we had decided early on, both Chris, Jill, and I had decided that we were going to stick with primarily a black and white canvas. That the costumes would be black and white, they would incorporate a little bit of earth tones in there to help break up and keep it from becoming truly stagnant, but we were going to stay with black and white so that when we decided to use color, that it would make a strong statement. By the way, that's not original to us, that is very much a Fellini-esque decision to make. He chose to make 8.5 in black and white, even though he could have very easily made it in color. The Folie Bergère number, and of course the second act, the craziest moment you've ever seen in a musical on this stage in the last 10 years, I would dare bet you, is the Casanova sequence, or what we call the Grand Canal sequence. It is his film once he's decided to make it. He decides in the second act that he's going to make it based on Casanova, and of course tying himself into Casanova. Fellini actually made a film about Casanova in '76. Go look it up on YouTube. You can actually watch the entire film on YouTube. It's Donald Sutherland plays Casanova in the film. But we specifically started looking at the elements of filmmaking that he used in Casanova de Federico Fellini. One of the things is the use of the Baroque to discuss the void of loveless life, not the enlightened gadabout town that we typically hear of Casanova being, but rather this man who is incapable of love and ultimately has a void life, void being Fellini's word for it, void life because he cannot love. There's a use of opera that takes place within Casanova, the film, that helps tell a story as it goes along. And particularly in the film, there's an opera/ballet that tells the story of a loveless passion where a man symbolically devours another man. It's stylized sexuality as well in the film, which you'll see that we take advantage of in Act 2, which is that it's highly suggestive, but it's not necessarily dirty, and it's certainly not pornographic. This is an example of this stylized movement that was used to represent sexuality throughout the film. So you'll see all of those elements utilized differently, but definitely from the Fellini list tonight in the show. We also looked into Baroque opera because you'll hear from the music that it very much takes on a Baroque opera nature. So we spent a lot of time, we knew who the characters were, we knew what the story, I knew exactly how it was going to move, Megan and I had already started meeting, we were all about it, everything was going to be just fine. There was just one problem, we really didn't know where all this took place. The original production had basically an open white space with raised blocks that were designated for each character in the show. Everybody had a home base. And it was meant to symbolize a spa or a bathhouse, if you will. The first stage direction that we get in the script is that the sense is conveyed of a dream space, perhaps one of Magritte or de Chirico. So, a dream space, that made sense, but that could be a lot of things. A dream space would work very well if we wanted him to be able to move in and out of reality and fantasy interchangeably. So we went to the artist that they suggested first. We went to René Magritte, who you may recognize probably most of all from his painting of the Son of Man there in the center. But the open space and desolate space was something that we first took notice of. We went, of course, to Giorgio de Chirico and paid attention to these paintings, these two paintings specifically. I brought back some pictures from when I went to Italy a couple years ago, and the things that really moved me were these desolate landscapes that are the remnants of the Forum. Of course, Mussolini's museum that we built. When Chris came in, he brought these pictures in, which I immediately fell in love with. We decided early on that water was going to be an important element in the set, that we would have a water fixture on the stage, and that this, particularly this one on the left, would serve as the basis of where we would go as far as levels and playing space. Because there are 18 women and 1 man and 2 little boys in this show, and a band, and they're on stage the whole time. The women are on stage almost the whole time. Guido is always on stage. So we had to have a lot of playing space so that we could keep them on stage and not let the stage space get you money. So we used these 3 photos as our basis for that. There's a couple little things I want to talk to you about that what I think of as trivia pursuit based on this quote. Just a couple things that I think are fun to know going into the show. First of all, Federico Fellini was known in a highly Catholic country for going toe-to-toe with the Catholics on numerous occasions. When God may not play dice, but he enjoys a good round of Trivial Pursuit every now and again. I'm going to show you the opening sequence from La Dolce Vita, and I think it'll become evident why the church wrote against it. So the Catholic Church said, he's parroting the second coming of Christ. How dare he? And it was banned in Italy for a time period. It was banned until 1975 when Franco died in Spain. But the true story is that he actually witnessed this happening. Them flying in a statue of Christ into St. Peter's Square to deliver to the Vatican. He'd actually seen it and was so struck by it as an artistic visual that he used it in this film. A couple other things. Fellini's ongoing disagreements with the church and censorship are going to be a part of the show, so that'll be something to remember. Fellini's sister, her name was Maria Maddalena. She is, which turns out to be the character Mama Maddalena in the show, who also plays Maria in Casanova. The other thing to point out, I said a moment ago, was Liliane Montevecchi. Does anybody remember Liliane Montevecchi? She originated the role of La Fleur, played tonight by Emily Crine, and of course the character's name is Liliane La Fleur, based off of Liliane Montevecchi. And there's a moment tonight where Emily is going to step forward and do a monologue from the Folie Bergère. That was written for Liliane, and Mark was telling me the other day there's this business about she got there and there were flowers in the dressing room, but she had no idea who it was. And they were working on a show with David Merrick, producer David Merrick, right? And everybody noticed that every day Liliane was getting flowers sent to her dressing room. And it was wonderful. Every day she was showing there'd be fresh flowers. And David Merrick walked up to her and said, I think it is amazing that you are getting flowers every day, but could you please quit making them bill it to me? So there's a bit about that tonight in the show, and that is actually where the sense of the monologue came in. The last thing I want to talk about really quickly is that we picked this show because we wanted to focus on the wonderfully talented women we have in this program. We sat down to decide our season this last year, and we knew that we had just graduated quite a few men. We had a smaller recruiting year the couple years before for men. We're on the way back up with men, but we knew, especially this first semester, we were going to be short on men for roles. But if you look at musical theater history, it's usually a lot of male roles and 2 female roles, and that's how it goes, but we always have more women. So this was an opportunity for us to showcase our women. I'm proud to say that it has all of the junior, senior class of musical theater majors in this show. Quite a few of our freshmen and our sophomores are in there as well. We've got a music major there, a media art major, but it's wonderful. And the number of people who've stopped me on opening night to say how happy they were that we were focusing on the talented women that we have in this program. And it's been quite a joy. So I'll finish up by saying, I don't like the idea of understanding film. I don't believe that rational understanding is an essential element, is an essential element in the reception of any work of art. Either a film has something to say to you or it hasn't. If not, no explanation can make you moved by it. Federico Fellini. And I think that's a wonderful way to say, I hope you love the show, and I hope that it means something to you. Last quote. There is no end, there is no beginning, there is only the passion of life. And so I changed all this. She's not gender specific, so we're naming her Guido now. We're having a wonderful time. Last thing, okay, thank you. That's the time for today.